At first, the last remnants of illusion fell away, one after another. Whatever fragile hopes anyone had secretly carried dissolved in the harsh clarity of reality. And then something unexpected appeared among us, a strange, almost shameful thing: black humor. We understood that nothing remained to lose except a life already reduced to bare existence. Standing under the communal showers, we made jokes, forced at first, each man laughing at himself before daring to laugh with the others. The water truly flowed, and that small mercy became absurdly funny. Alongside this dark humor came another feeling: curiosity. It was the same detached curiosity that sometimes appears in moments of mortal danger. I had known it once before, during accidents in the mountains, in those suspended seconds when one wonders almost calmly whether one will live or die. In the camp, this cold curiosity created distance between the self and the surrounding horror. The mind withdrew, observing rather than reacting, as though watching events unfold from afar. We wondered what would happen next, what the consequences would be, of standing naked and wet in the open air of late autumn, of enduring what seemed unendurable. In the days that followed, curiosity gave way to surprise. Surprised that we did not immediately fall ill, surprised at what the human body could withstand. Many of the so-called certainties we once believed collapsed. Medical knowledge, textbooks, personal convictions about limits all proved unreliable. That first night, 9 men lay pressed together on each wooden tier of a 3-level bunk with only a couple of blankets between us. We lay on our sides, bodies wedged tightly together, which at least helped against the cold in the unheated barracks. Shoes were forbidden in the bunks, yet some risked punishment by using their mud-caked footwear as pillows. Most of us rested our heads on aching arms, yet sleep still came, and with it a brief escape from pain. Other impossibilities became routine. Months passed without toothbrushes, yet gums did not rot as we might have expected. Shirts were worn for half a year, unwashed, stiff with dirt. Hands wounded and filthy from labor did not always fester. Men who once woke at the slightest sound now slept beside companions who snored loudly in their ears. We learned the truth of a phrase: the human being is a creature who can get used to anything, but no one should ask how. We were still in the first phase of psychological reaction. Facing constant danger, the daily presence of death, it was natural that thoughts of suicide crossed many minds, if only briefly. In the camp, the usual method was to touch the electrified barbed wire, to go to the wire, as it was called. On my first night, just before sleep, I made a silent promise to myself not to choose that path. The decision was not as difficult as it might seem. Statistically, the chances of survival were already so small that suicide seemed almost pointless. In the shock of those first days, death itself no longer inspired fear. For many, the gas chamber appeared not as horror, but as a release from the burden of deciding. The shock did not crush me entirely. I remember even managing a sincere smile the following morning. A fellow prisoner who had arrived weeks earlier slipped into our barrack to reassure us. He was gaunt, nearly unrecognizable, yet oddly cheerful. He gave advice that sounded almost absurd in its simplicity. Shave every day, no matter how. Look healthy, never appear sick, walk upright. In that place, survival depended not only on strength, but on appearance. To look weak was to be marked. To limp was to be noticed. To be noticed was often to disappear. He spoke of the type of prisoner they called a Muslim, a man who had lost all strength, all hope, reduced to a walking shadow. Such men, he said, inevitably ended in the gas chamber. Then he pointed at me and remarked almost casually that I might be the only one among the group in danger at the next selection. I smiled. In that abnormal world, an abnormal reaction was the only normal one. After a few days, the first phase faded. The second began, apathy, a kind of inner dying. At first, the newly arrived prisoner was tormented by longing for family, a longing so intense it felt like being consumed from within. There was also disgust at the filth, the rags we wore, the mud that filled the camp. Those assigned to clean latrines carried waste across uneven ground, often splashed by it. Any attempt to wipe one's face might be punished as weakness. In the beginning, we turned away from scenes of brutality. We could not bear to watch men beaten, forced to march for hours through muck, driven by blows. But gradually, something changed. A man could stand in line at dawn, hear the cries, see a fellow prisoner beaten to the ground again and again for the crime of being ill, and feel nothing. Not indifference born of cruelty, but of exhaustion of feeling. In the infirmary at night, one might hope for a few days of rest because of wounds or fever, and watch without emotion as a young boy's frostbitten toes were removed with forceps. Disgust, horror, pity, outrage, these feelings dulled. Suffering and death became part of the daily landscape. I once lay in a barrack among typhus patients, many delirious with fever, many close to death. Another man died. One by one, others approached the still warm body, taking what they could, a scrap of potato, a slightly better pair of wooden shoes, a coat, a piece of string. I watched, apathetic. At last, I forced myself to ask the orderly to remove the body. He dragged it by the legs down the narrow passage, the head bumping against the steps with hollow thuds. Soon after, soup was brought and eagerly consumed. My place was near the door, opposite a small window. I held the warm bowl in my frozen hands and drank greedily. By chance, I glanced outside. The body lay there, eyes open, staring. Only hours earlier, I had spoken with that man. I continued to drink. Had I not been struck by my own lack of feeling, observing it almost with professional curiosity, the moment might not have stayed in my memory at all. The blows came for reasons too small to be called reasons at all, and often for no reason. Yet, strangely, the body learned to endure them faster than the soul did. Very soon, a kind of emotional numbness settled over the prisoners like a second skin. It was not courage, it was not acceptance, it was armor. Without it, a person would not last long. We stood in line for the thin midday ration. Someone behind stepped a little out of alignment. That was enough. I felt 2 sharp strikes against my head before I even understood what was happening. Only then did I see the guard beside me, baton still raised. The physical pain faded quickly. What burned was something else. The knowledge that we were no longer addressed as human beings, not even worth a reprimand, only correction, like animals nudged back into place. The deepest wounds were not made by sticks, they were made by contempt. Once, in a snowstorm, we worked along a railway line, the wind cutting through our rags. I forced myself to move faster, to warm my body by effort, stuffing stones beneath the rails. For a moment, I stopped to breathe, leaning on my tool. The guard turned and assumed I was idle. He did not bother to strike me. Instead, as if amused, he picked up a stone and threw it at me, the way one would get the attention of a stray dog. In that instant, I felt something colder than the snow, the realization that in his eyes, I did not even deserve punishment. I was beneath that. Mockery was worse than hunger. We carried heavy wooden beams over ice-covered tracks. If one man fell, many could be crushed. A friend of mine limped badly due to a birth defect in his hip. Every selection meant death for men like him, yet he fought to work. I moved to help him steady the beam. A baton struck my back immediately. The same supervisor who shouted that we had no sense of comradeship now punished me for showing it. At 20 degrees below zero, we dug frozen ground in a forest. My strength was nearly gone. The foreman, cheeks red from warmth and gloves on his hands, watched me. He wore a fur-lined coat. I wore frozen rags. He accused me of laziness, screaming that he would finish me within days. He asked what I had been before, sneering. I was a doctor, a specialist, I said. He laughed. You stole from people. I worked mainly in a clinic for the poor, I answered. That enraged him more than silence would have. He threw me to the ground. I remember his voice, but not the words. What saved me was chance and a capo who felt gratitude because I had once listened to him speak about his private troubles, offering him the kind of understanding I used to give patients. In the camp, even a fragment of one's former profession could become a thread of survival. This same capo had secured me a place in the first row of our marching column. That position meant less stopping, fewer beatings when others stumbled, and sometimes a deeper scoop of soup before the barrel ran empty. Such small advantages could separate life from death. My feet by then were swollen with hunger edema. The skin was tight, cracked, and raw. Every step was agony. Snow melted inside my shoes and froze again. Men fell often, and when they did, the column behind collapsed like dominoes. Guards rushed in, striking us to force us up. Being near the front meant fewer delays, fewer blows. Survival depended on inches, on position, on invisible calculations. Even in this numbness, there were moments when revolt still flared, not against pain, but against humiliation. To be beaten was expected. To be treated as something less than an animal, that was harder to bear. And yet, not all overseers were the same. Some showed a trace of pity, allowing slower work, accepting our explanations that a normal worker did not live on 300 grams of bread and watery soup, that a normal worker did not carry the constant terror of not knowing whether his family still lived, that a normal worker did not fall asleep under the daily shadow of death. Still, the general condition remained: apathy. Apathy was not weakness, it was protection. The mind narrowed its field of vision. Feelings shrank to a single purpose: to stay alive, and, if possible, to help one other stay alive too. When we returned from labor at dusk, stumbling back through the gates, the same phrase could be heard again and again, spoken without irony: "Another day has passed." And in those words was everything: exhaustion, relief, resignation, and the faint, stubborn will to see one more dawn. In such a hopeless psychological situation, under the relentless pressure of immediate survival, the inner life of a person sank to a more primitive level. It was something many of us recognized. Friends who had studied psychology called it a regression, a retreat of the mind to its most basic forms of desire and need. And nowhere was this more visible than in our dreams. The typical dream of a prisoner was not of freedom, nor of family, nor of justice. It was of bread, of cakes, of cigarettes, of a bathtub filled with warm water. The unsatisfied body sought fulfillment in sleep, and the starving mind created simple, almost childlike visions of satisfaction. Yet the cruelty of such dreams lay in the awakening. To open one's eyes and return from illusion to the raw reality of the camp was a shock that cut deep. One night, the man beside me moaned and twisted in his sleep, clearly trapped in a nightmare. My instinct was to wake him, to free him from whatever horror he was experiencing. I have always felt deep pity for those tormented by dreadful dreams. But just as my hand reached toward him, I stopped. A sudden realization held me back. No nightmare could be worse than the reality awaiting him if he woke. I withdrew my hand. I could not bring him back to this world. Hunger ruled everything. Among the primitive instincts that now governed us, the urge for food stood above all. Whenever prisoners gathered at work, in moments when supervision loosened even slightly, the conversation turned immediately to meals. Someone would ask the man beside him about his favorite dish. Recipes were exchanged in detail. Imaginary menus were planned for the day when, after liberation, we would invite each other to our homes. These conversations fascinated us so completely that we could hardly stop until a disguised warning sign, often a casually spoken number, alerted us to the approach of a guard. I always had doubts about these obsessive discussions about food. We called it stomach masturbation. The body, in its desperate adaptation to starvation, had in a way adjusted to the meager rations. To awaken it with vivid images of rich dishes seemed dangerous. The mind might find temporary relief in fantasy, but the body paid the price. Our daily nourishment consisted of a thin, watery soup served once a day and a tiny piece of bread. Occasionally there was a so-called extra, a small smear of margarine, a slice of poor sausage, a scrap of cheese, artificial honey, or a spoonful of thin jam. The calories were grossly insufficient, especially considering the heavy labor, the freezing temperatures, and our inadequate clothing. The sick, who were spared outside work and lay in the barracks, were often worse off. Once the last traces of body fat disappeared, we became skeletons wrapped in skin and rags. Then the body began to consume itself. Muscles wasted away. Resistance vanished. Men died one after another in our hut. We could often predict who would be next. The signs were clear. At night, while picking lice from our clothing, we looked at our naked bodies and thought, "This body here, my body, is already a corpse." What were we now? A fragment of a great mass of human flesh, fenced in with barbed wire, crowded into earthen huts, a mass from which a certain percentage rotted away each day. Thoughts of food returned obsessively whenever the mind had a moment of space. Even the best among us longed for the time when we could eat normally again, not for pleasure, but simply to be free from the humiliation of being unable to think of anything else. Those who have never starved cannot imagine the inner erosion caused by these constant conflicts. Standing in a trench with a pickaxe, we waited endlessly for the siren that marked 9:30 or 10, for the half-hour noon pause when the ration was distributed. We asked the time again and again, even if passing civilians, if they seemed approachable. With numb, gloveless fingers, we touched the small piece of bread in our pockets, broke off a crumb, brought it to our mouths, then forced ourselves to return it to the pocket. That morning, we had sworn to hold out until noon. Endless debates filled our thoughts. Should one eat the bread ration all at once or divide it into pieces through the day? One group preferred to eat everything immediately, killing the worst hunger at least once and removing the risk of theft. The other, to which I belonged, chose to save part of it. The worst moment of the day was waking. The shrill whistles tore us from exhausted sleep before dawn. We faced the struggle with wet shoes, trying to force swollen, wounded feet inside. Men cursed the bits of wire that served as laces, which snapped again and again. Strong men wept like children when they realized they would have to walk barefoot to roll call, carrying their tight, damp shoes in their hands. In those terrible minutes, I had one small comfort. I would take from my pocket the piece of bread saved from the night before and slowly chew it, completely absorbed in that brief pleasure. Severe malnutrition also explained another phenomenon. The sexual instinct, which one might expect to surface in a camp filled with men, was almost entirely absent. Apart from the initial shock, there was little of the corruption seen in other mass lodgings. Even dreams rarely contained sexual content. Instead, what appeared were inhibited longings, the prisoner's deep desire for love, for human closeness, for tenderness, rising in disguised form during sleep. Life had been reduced to its most primitive drives, yet somewhere beneath starvation, exhaustion, and humiliation, the human soul still held its capacity to long for love.